Plants that are called hyperaccumulator behave slightly different compared to other plants.
I find it quite interesting that these plants are able to live or exist in a land or something which is considered like a wasteland, and they're still able to harvest and give us resources that can go in an endless loop. And I think this actually taps into the idea of upcycling and having resources that can be reused instead of just lost at some point in time during our usage.
These plants are known as hyperaccumulator because they move the metals from their roots into their aerial part, which means the body, so the stalk, the leaves, but not really the flowers and the seeds. So it actually goes into the body mostly, which is really good because the pollinators are not affected and whatever is used for the seed is not affected either. We harvest our plants, we bioprocess them. Our biomass, our reactor where the biomass is, we actually use room temperature, and we don't use any acids, and we don't we don't burn the biomass itself. So the plants that I have here at the moment are actually plants that we selected for the project, for an Innovate UK project called PhytoRay. And specifically we target rarer metals for permanent magnets. So what we did is that we did a literature research to find out what has been published about what type of plants can actually tackle rare earths. And we found quite a lot of studies from China that were talking about ferns. So we looked at the ferns that were local from the UK. At the same time, what we're trying to do is trying to see if industrial crops can actually do the same thing. So we started working with miscanthus, that is one of the energy crops, and to evaluate if they can be used for rare earth as well or for other metals. We are doing a priming, so we are adjusting the plants to live in a contaminated soil. And so that's why they are in the greenhouse, and then we're going to move them to the sites where we're working, which are the Barnsley and the Salford site, to look at the uptake in natural environment.
The day-to-day care of the plants, so we'll go into the greenhouse. With the greenhouse, they're fairly temperamental, so we'll look at rough growth conditions, the rough uptake, rough accumulation, and then from there we'll set a plan in terms of watering. We want to keep it as natural as possible, so we don't want to overwater, where you can increase saturation in the soil and potentially decomposition and rot within the roots. So you have to take everything fairly calm and collected and analyse it necessarily. So
the idea for this project came out the first time I went to Comiswith mines in mid Wales in Ceredigion. What I noticed is that there were plants that were actually growing in the sludge coming out of the adits. So there was a lot of metal in that. The water is actually orange. And there were plants that were thriving. No, they weren't just surviving, they were actually thriving in there. Then when I came to Brunel, I met the Deputy Director of the Experimental Technique Centre, Dr. Alan Reynolds, and he did his PhD on hyperaccumulator in mid Wales as well. And we started discussing about the plants accumulating metals from the soil. And that was the beginning of the idea of trying to see, okay, can we use then these plants as a mining tool, not just as a remediation tool. The main goals of this research, well, at the beginning it was just the idea of generating new materials from these areas that are abandoned from industrial activities. Now that the project developed and the idea evolved, what we are trying to do is not only to make these areas productive again, but to make these areas as central hub for the industrial landscape of the region. So we produce specifically for the other industries that are in the area. That can be construction, can be paper. So all of this becomes kind of a central point and a focal point for this production, which is what these areas were in the past and are no more. So just give it back the same value.